All right, we're live. This is Hangops for December 12th, 2014. And yeah, I want to start off with a couple just sort of reminder shout outs. If you're not following and reading them, you should be following SysAdvent and AWS Advent and reading the posts. A lot of good stuff coming out there. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about this idea of sort of event driven automation. And in particular, got a special guest, James, here to kind of talk to us about what the company he's at, Stackstorm, and what they're doing around this idea of vendor automation and some open source stuff that they're putting out. That's looking really cool. So James, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, Brandon, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Cool. Yeah. So why don't you, since not everyone may know you, kind of give us a little intro, kind of who you are, your background, and then kind of what what Stackstorm is up to in this idea of event-driven automation.
Sure. Yeah. So hi. I'm James Fryman. I am currently I think I called a stormer here at Stackstorm. Well, every company's got their fun name for it. I've been in IT now for about 15 years. A lot of my background has been in security and infrastructure, and then obviously with a huge love and passion around automation. So this is kind of what I wake up and I'm excited to do is have computers do my bidding. Um, I joined Stackstorm just recently, about a month ago, actually. Previous to that, I was at GitHub as an operations engineer for 2 years. And then prior to that, I ran my own company, and I also spent some time at Puppet Labs. This is all of the work, at least for the last 6 years or so, has been focused around how do we make computers smarter so that I can go spend more time doing the things that I love and care about. I love and care about computers and whatnot, but I equally love and care about my friends, my family, the time I spend at the bar, the stories that happen around it. And so a lot of the work around that is removing the pain around infrastructure, around operations, so that exactly that, right? My on-call is less painful, my beer time is more fun, all those things. So, so what Stackstorm is kind of the next iteration of this idea for me. A lot of the time I've spent has been in the configuration management realm, specifically a lot of focus with Puppet, and then certainly used a ton of the other tools. But if I had to strike one, it's definitely Puppet. But there's limitations in the configuration management realm, right? We as an industry have been trying to overload what these tools can do, right? Like trying to get hardcore orchestration or state management, and it's not always the right use case. And so a lot of what kind of attracted me to Stackstorm is this, again, this event-driven approach to the world, right? An action happens in some tool, whatever that tool may be. We're going to ingest that action, and we're going to have a rules engine associated with it. We can take arbitrary actions as a result of it. So we can create really complex workflows that actually are modeled in YAML. So we're really looking at trying to figure out how to codify the IT operations experience, right? Everybody's got run books, but they're all kind of common to a company or common to a process. And really what I want to be able to do is say, look, we should be talking about operational patterns on a larger scale. But we don't have a model to do that yet. So hopefully, this is our goal, is start getting really complex workflows modeled that we can share and iterate on with a ton of people. Start really kind of figuring out how to create a common language for these orchestration tools that exist in the wild. They're all homegrown and custom built, and that just creates a ton of problems. And we'll talk about all this today. But that's kind of the overview.
Okay, interesting. It reminds me a lot of at least the idea of where I feel like we see a lot of like web sort of app architectures moving from like your sort of Rails or LAMP stack, and maybe with like asynchronous workers to something like a Kafka plus like Storm or Spark or Samza. These sort of like this idea of like there's a stream of things going through, and stuff is sort of happening based on the stream.
Right, right. Yeah, and we've had this for some time now, or parts of this for a while, right? Like if you think about Nagios event handlers, we can kind of and have started to paste together this automation framework. But the real power then comes is like not all events are reactive, right? I don't want to always be responding to some negative event. What about things like the cloud over a DigitalOcean happens to be 4 cents cheaper than Amazon today, right? Because they're playing price wars. Wouldn't it be neat if my system could suddenly be aware of that and move assets and resources over there to save a little bit of money? Like, kind of interesting, like out of the box thinking that's more than just how do I make my on-call experience better? How do I really let the computer be smart enough to do things that um, can actually provide super awesome business value, right? That's the ultimate goal, is to turn what we're doing from a cost center to a value add and a growth perspective. And I definitely think that the event-driven kind of view of the world is the way to get there, or a way to get there, a strong way to get there.
Okay, so it definitely seems like there's both maybe some sort of like synergy and overlap with how we think about using tools like Puppet and Chef or Ansible and Salt, which usually people are using for, kind of like you said, a mix of like sort of configuration or state management and also a certain amount of like orchestration.
Right.
Um, so where do you see sort of the uh, edges of something, like Stackstorm and the edges of like config management tools? Like, where do you see sort of the boundary between them start to happen in an
Yeah.
ideal
I
world?
mean, our goal is to sit on top of all these things, right? If we think about the different layers of infrastructure management, our goal is to get to the point where as I expire out of the node, like from a Puppet perspective, I look at the node, and I want to be thinking about the system as a whole. So when suddenly my node needs to know more information about what the larger bit of it's doing and its role in the world, we want to be able to absorb those triggers, right? Like, okay, I need to know who my load balancer friends are. I need to know what their state is. I need to know how my MySQL cluster is doing, right? You can't model what other things are doing very easily in configuration management tools today. You can, make best approximations and get there with eventual consistency, but it's still, the convergence time may be not optimal, right? So we need something faster that can respond, within seconds as opposed to within minutes. And even so, like, getting to the point where maybe it's not even automated, maybe I'm just manually triggering some of these events and kind of shepherding them along.
But like I guess practically speaking, like, what is something that I might want to do with event driven that I, what I mean, like I would not do with like Chef, or maybe, say I'm already using like Chef and Sensu,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
just thinking like, how do I fit this new tool in my toolbox?
So, one of the use cases we're working on right now is like a continuous delivery pipeline. So, these exist in the wild at different places, and they're built with, shell scripts of custom built internally. Um, what we want to be able to do with this modeling language is, get out of trying to overload what a given tool can do, right? So, like if I've got a Jenkins view of the world, there's plenty of people that know how to manipulate the heck out of that XML file and really get Jenkins to create a giant pipeline. But that blocks me into that specific application, right? What happens if I hate Jenkins upgrades, or the community pisses me off, or a feature that I need is no longer there? Wrapper around these tools to create fixtures that we can then look at as a larger perspective. So now, like, okay, I'm done with Jenkins and I want to go try Travis. So I'm going to actually just rip out this small component and put in a new one. And that's able to do like with an event-driven infrastructure like this, because now what I can do is I can take all of the actions and kind of drill them down to the smallest unit possible, and it's much easier to build Lego blocks when I've got a ton of them to build, as opposed to like, okay, I got this monolithic thing, I got to figure out where it can plug in and how it can plug in. So like from an event perspective, like maybe Sensu, let's go back to your original example, maybe Sensu emits an alert, right? And we need to go, provision a new server as a result of that. The auto scaling kind of a view of the world. Amazon does that for you if you're in Amazon, but not every cloud offers this thing for you. So now suddenly I can emit and absorb logs out of my Sensu that says, hey, you're approaching capacity. Go provision some new servers, and then that action happens for me automatically, or it does actions that may trigger me to go do those things automatically, create issues or whatnot. A lot of what we're battling with right now is how far down this rabbit hole can we go? We can go infinitely. How far will the market let us go? There's still a lot of apprehension around the depth and how much we give power over to the computers. So it's a big exploration for us right now. We're definitely looking at how do we make it easy to just swap out components pretty easily. I think that's kind of one big view we're looking at today.
Okay. So what is StackStorm itself? Like what are its pieces? Sort of what am I taking on if I wanted to deploy it?
Yeah, so it's under pretty rapid development right now. So there's kind of a broker view of the world, right? So we've got a middle tier layer that's built on RabbitMQ. We have all of the stack is Python today, so all the Pythonistas can be real happy about that. There's an API component that kind of ingests events and ingests webhooks and allows you to kind of control from any given area, which we're going to be leveraging very heavily for things like ChatOps, which I know was a topic for you guys last week, so maybe we'll talk about that a little too. There is, we're also playing and integrate with one of the OpenStack tools called Mistral, which is one of their workflow engines. So we have a Mistral installation that comes with that, which includes that application stack and a MySQL. There's a MongoDB component today, which we use for kind of our rapid iteration, and we're going to be working on getting to a Postgres stack before we get to like ultimate production. And then yeah, we have containerized, or not containerized in the Docker sense, but isolated containers for sensors to run, which are like just basically our workers, which we can scale out, depending on how many events you're processing in a given time. Yeah, I think that's it. And we've got a really great kind of architectural diagram on our website, docs.stackstorm.com. You can take a look at it if you're more interested about like how the events flow from the different parts of the infrastructure and where the different parts of the reactor system kind of interact together.
Okay, so I'm deploying this, so it sounds like I've got probably a couple things, right? I got a sensor, API server, like you say, like right now it's a MongoDB, so basically like a data store. How am I integrating? Am I running an agent on the servers that is like tailing logs and do I have something listening on a socket that I'm sending stuff into, like Graphite? Like how do I integrate with my stuff?
Yes, so we have a ton of ways to do that. We have this kind of sensor view of the world that you can create arbitrary sensors to integrate. So if you want to create new webhooks or new webhook endpoints to send events to, we have that option. We have what's called a local Python option, which gets basically takes Python actions and executes them on our workers. We have a local runner action, which will execute commands on the local StackStorm server if you happen to need to do that. And we also have a remote run option, which uses SSH and Fabric on the back end to do server-specific items. So most of the way we're tackling this right now is if we need to touch the server, it's usually that Fabric runner, and if we need to integrate with something external, it's either a receive hook from one of our webhooks or a pull with one of our Python runners that we can just integrate into existing APIs. One of the tools that's going to get released today is a beta of what we're calling Voodoo, which basically you run a command and you point it toward a Python library and immediately it becomes a set of actions that you can then integrate and start to use as building blocks for the system.
Okay, interesting. And so then, it seems like a lot of kind of where I would use this is maybe as like a single platform to do like you're kind of talking about these sort of like higher level sort of gluing the things together, almost like a if this then that for for some of your infrastructure. I don't know if you've played with that.
Yeah, that's actually how we sell it is, or talk about it in public is it's exactly that. It's if this then that for infrastructure, right? We're providing a ton of actions. We want to build this community around building these actions. It's stupid easy to do these things. And we can integrate with existing shell scripts. So it's not like, look, you have to use our actions. If you've already got a library of things that you're already using, it's pretty easy to get it pulled into StackStorm and get started.
So what sort of view of the world do I get with StackStorm itself? Like, what, am I going to see like stuff going through in the web UI? Is it keeping track of stuff internally? Do I need to forward what it's doing to something like Logstash to keep
Mhm.
track of what it does?
Yeah, we've got a ton of logging that we do that we're working on, creating syslog hooks, so you can send those to a syslog agent and then do parsing with those. So those will all be in structured JSON, so we can do some really cool searching within your log tool. The other piece that we've got is oh man, I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. So ask your question one more time.
Oh, just sort of like what view of the world do I see in StackStorm
Ah,
itself, and what do I need to like maybe emit to other things to sort of see what's going on?
yeah, so we've also got an audit view of the world, right? So every event and every action that's taken, we can tell you who ran it, what context it ran under, the parameters that were executed upon it, and then the result of those things, whatever that may be. That's what kind of the web UI gives you, as well as you can access through the command line. Um, and then we're going to be playing more with our web UI, which will be released, I believe, at the end of January. We're doing some like private betas for people who want to give us some feedback. But we're looking to make this web UI pretty complex and pretty full featured, but also give you the flexibility that if you do want to export it, you're not really locked into our solution. Right? One of our big tenets is open source and share. Right? So any data that we've got should be available through an API, through these logs, whatever necessary.
And so it seems like a lot of the technology is open source. You're building on open source, stuff under the hood. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I believe you guys are venture backed, right?
We have a what do you call angel seed?
Okay.
We are, yes. Our goal is to figure out how do we give introspection into how people are leveraging the tools, right? So, like, you think about, how are your tools being used? Can you answer the question of, I spent X amount of money on this software product? Am I getting my return on investment in it? Like, that's kind of hard to determine today, but once it becomes an action within StackStorm, even if it's a passive action, now you've got a whole audit trail around that, and you can figure out who ran it, how they ran it, and now you get data about how people are interacting with the system. Um, Big push for us is being able to provide that analytical view of the world back to the people who need to make decisions, right? Like, where are hotspots happening? How are people talking to this thing? What's changing about how people are interacting with these things? Every time that maybe, say, even kind of advanced analytical models that say, I noticed that after X event happens, 80% of the time you end up doing event Y. Do you want me to create a workflow for you, right? So really getting intelligent about trying to stitch together complex workflows.
Okay. So do you see maybe like hosted, uh, you know, thing as part of it? Like, and this is one of the challenges, right? If it seems like if you're going open source, it's sort of like where's the like you know company sort of aspect? Is it like hosted, or
Right.
is it like enhance like certain like sort of enterprise functionality? Or I mean,
Sure.
if that's not something you guys are talking about, I totally understand that. I'm just curious, like if like you're what you can say publicly about the future of that.
Yeah, I can certainly say we're batting around a lot of things, right?
Okay.
And there's a lot of kind of early questions we're working on. I know at this point our big focus is get the application and get people excited about it, and then we can figure out what's the best way to attack the analytic angle. Cloud is certainly not off the table, but we're big focusing on on-prem today. Obviously we're giving this tool a lot of permissions to your organization. So we're trying to get the security concerns right on-prem before we start looking at cloud solutions.
Cool, cool. I actually had a question. It kind of goes back 2 questions ago. I love the command line. I'm mainly a developer, and I'm slowly learning more ops stuff. So I love command line. That's where I live. I love the terminal. So you talk about the web UI that you're doing, and you're doing beta access right now. Is that just hooking into the command line interface, and it's just a lot of power right there? So they're kind of in like they're two endpoints, but they kind of leverage the same tooling, or is there a bunch of web UI stuff that's being built out that I'm not going to be able to access from the command line?
Yeah, good question. Thanks. The answer is how we create our interfaces, whether it's command line or web UI, is using the same API backend, right? So look, it's neat that you can have a command line access. You're going to get the same power you're going to get out of the web UI. And then even so, like here's the API documentation. Go write your own fun stuff, right? In the language of your choice. Maybe you don't like our command line and how it prints things, and you may want to get a different custom view, right? We want to be able to offer that kind of power.
Awesome, cool, thanks.
Thank you. I think somebody's talking, but I can't quite hear him.
Yeah, sorry. Hard to mute.
No worries.
So, can you maybe dig a little deeper on some of the ways that like someone might get started with like with StackStorm or with just this sort of idea of like doing event-driven stuff? And you touched on chat ops. That seems like it might be an interesting place to unpack some like practical like getting started with this concept. And if you want to dive really deep into like how you might do with StackStorm, go ahead.
Yeah. So let's talk about like the different kinds of companies, right? There's your very cautious is a good word, companies that IT change happens slow for them, and then there's companies that have IT change that happens at the speed of light. We're kind of attacking it from both angles today, where if I were to go into one of these cautious companies, we give them the ability to get introspection without the ability for the system to really do anything. So, okay, great. You plug in these actions, you start building the audit log, and at least immediately I start getting introspection to what is happening in my kind of day-to-day operations. So that's part one. Part two is one of the big components and what I'm most excited about in this is, the end state is event-driven automation. But there's this huge chasm between where we're currently at in terms of companies and where we want to be at the end, right? There's only a small subset of companies today that are pushing toward this like 100% automation. Everybody else is still doing the change management ITIL game and moving around papers and typing in commands to servers. And so kind of crossing that bridge of I want to be able to trust the system can be a challenge, and that's where the chat ops component comes in. And I think this is going to be our big differentiator. All of the commands that we have, we call them actions, will be available and exposed through a chat ops. So now I can plug StackStorm into whatever my chat client of choice is and execute these commands arbitrarily and get responses back in my chat room. So the experience of being able to do operations in line with the human conversation becomes a much easier and attainable goal. And that's kind of one of the big drawbacks to trying to pitch chat ops as well today is there's a huge barrier to entry to that, and we want to reduce that. And what chat ops does, and what we've seen do in past lives and past companies that we want to replicate here, is chat ops allows people to gain trust in the system, right? So from the command line or from the chat client, I'm executing these actions 5, 10, hundreds of times a day maybe. And so suddenly like it goes from I don't know what the system's doing to I'm just asking the system to do this thing 20 times, and each 20 times becomes the same event happens, and how I feel good about that. So now I can start to use that Lego brick as the workflow. So you get your crawl, walk, run. I go from audit to being able to execute commands arbitrarily with chat ops to recommendations and building of workflows that ultimately get you to the end state. What we think will be like a combination of all three. Like the 100% is a utopian mecca that certainly I want to shoot for, but not all events are going to want to be 100% automated, right? So you can have the arbitrary command execution with chat ops for those kind of more dangerous or handholdy type things. and then give the easier things, the level 1, level 2 kind of tasks back to the computer, right? Oh, I know how that's done. I've codified the workbook. I know what my exact input is, and run with it. So yeah, I think that's definitely the approach that we're going to take.
So how much of the like sort of I think you kind of called it like the audit trail right now, how much of that can I like see like GUI like timeliney kind of stuff around?
Yeah, today you can do that right away. So you can do that either from the command line or from the web UI. There's an audit page on the web UI, and then there's a kind of a execution endpoint that will show here's all the events that they happen in sequence and what their statuses of them are. Here are the events that are in process, and we're even working on a streaming API so that as those events are happening in real time, I can do introspection on those if I need to, either through the web UI or through ChatOps or whatever. Right? We're still working on the mechanics of that, but we want to make sure that at any point in the transaction, you can see exactly what is about to happen, what is happening, and what has happened.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, this seems like an interesting sort of platform to build. Almost like a sort of infrastructure change log-ish thing, which is something that like every job I've had, we've always like it's always been one of those like wish lists. Is could I just like look at something and it sort of is showing me like like what's changed? Like people sometimes
Right.
you get that question. Has anything changed? Has anything changed in the last 24 hours? And it's like, well, yeah, lots of things have, but like, but it seems like this potentially gives you a lot of that the underpinnings you need for that. It's just a matter of starting to funnel the information in, and then I guess is there like, or maybe this is what it is, but like as stuff comes in, is there transformations processing that can be done on it within like StackStorm, as far as then like how it looks in the audit trail and sort of that like history that you're given, like, or does that depend on like the integrations, or how does that?
I think it depends on the integrations, right? Because each integration is going to have some different output, and we're working on kind of pushing toward structured data all over the place. We want to make sure that it's easily consumable from actions in and out, and easily kind of modifiable in the different workflows. But you're right. It is pretty much exactly kind of how it operates today. Is that?
Because I'm just kind of envisioning, like having like a feed, like some of the stuff I'd want to funnel into it might be like, having like a chef handler or something like that that's reporting that into it, as my Jenkins builds run, maybe as like, having some existing CD stuff, maybe I want to start having that, like, maybe if I have that emit to like Graphite, I might also like have that go through this somehow, you know what I mean? Like you said, so that first one is like funnel the information flow.
Right.
And then once it's all there, then I can start tapping it, for like QBot integration or like a Slack bot or like stuff like that. And I'm just sort of wondering like how rich that feed can be, sort of right off the bat, or like, can I like would I would I would I want to outsource maybe some of that to like something like Logstash and Kibana, or like how much would I want to try to use this as like my like timeline of the world, and be able to like go and see like, oh, when did our Nginx upgrade automatically happen across our fleet or something like that, or you know what I mean, like.
Yeah, and I don't know if like maybe if you happen to like the Logstash view of the world, you can take and use these events that you're building to shove all that stuff into there, right? Maybe you've got a nice custom UI on top of that you want to leverage. But our goal is to get to the point where we can assemble this chain arbitrarily and just kind of dive really deep into it. We don't have all the answers today. I'm going to be quite honest with you, but I do know that that we're really excited about getting this right. Because this is what we believe is kind of the next phase here of how people are going to operate. And so when we don't have answered questions, we're taking feedback hot and heavy, right? So if you get started with this thing, you go download it and you find something that, hey, I don't like this. We're doing quick turnarounds to try to make it right because we're building it for me, for you, for all the different SREs and DevOpers and whatever we want to call ourselves today, right? This is a tool for us, right?
Yeah, definitely. And so one other thing I'm thinking along those lines is like as stuff is ingested into right, it comes in through the API through a sensor. Like within StackStorm itself, can you build like a pipeline of things that happen before it leaves StackStorm and goes out to something? Like how does
Absolutely.
okay.
Yeah. So as an event comes in, you hand it off. You can create rules, and a rule can either kind of trigger an action, which may be a one thing, or can trigger a workflow, which is a collection of actions that can take many paths. So if I have I want to emit. Think of a good example, right? One of the things like with bash scripts is really hard is kind of hard to describe parallel tasks in a given time. Maybe I want to execute parallel tasks when an event comes in. So say I have a failure that comes in. I want to be able to open a GitHub issue. I want to be able to notify the PagerDuty. I want to be able to ping into my chat room. This is the kind of complex workflows that we want to be able to build and stack upon. And on top of that, what's really cool is these workflows, not only can they model really complex things, if I have a failure at any point, it's not like a bash script where I've got to go back and rerun it from the beginning and hope that it's idempotent in state and can get back to where I am. You can actually start workflows from where they failed again, make the corrections, and keep going down the road. So it gives you really kind of super complex depth into how we interact with the system. And workflows can trigger additional workflows. So these become huge, huge workflows and really model how you do IT operations, which is our ultimate goal, right? You said earlier, I want to be able to understand how all the things work or, how all the events happened. Well, suddenly, I had an Nginx upgrade and I'm codifying my run books, which is really important to me. Like I can see this is exactly what happened from A to Z. Like I have 100% complete transparency. We were actually talking about this at dinner last night. That's one big goal of us, right? Is we should be able to gain, with the ideal of infrastructure as code. Every bit of this is codified with the idea that everything is an action. Now I have an entire audit history of everything that happens, maybe down to the Git commit level. A commit was made that bumped a package, that upgraded a server, that caused a failure, that was paged, and then this event happened, and and continuing to do all the other things at the same time.
Interesting. What sort of scale would you say that the StackStorm sort of stack is ready for in terms of like hosts and events? If I have 50 hosts, 100 hosts, 1,000 hosts, like how much of the fire hose can I put in this today?
That's a good question. We're still doing stress testing on that, so I can't answer definitively. I can say that we've got some customers that have relatively decent-sized installations, and we're not hitting roadblocks yet. One of the things is a highly modular system, and it was one of the big tenets from the beginning. We want this thing to be the heart of your enterprise, which means it's got to be able to handle billions of events if it needs to, and that's our goal, right? Like theoretically, we should be able to handle this much, and we're not going to rest until we can.
In terms of scaling some of the underlying pieces like RabbitMQ, Mongo, and operating those, like should I approach this with how much background should I have in knowing how to run those sort of things under the hood versus is support available to help know how to scale those pieces or
sure
sort of the operational burden of adopting this.
Absolutely. So we do have professional services that we're offering to clients at this point. So we definitely want to make sure we're there with, not abandoning somebody, right? We're getting really good feedback about our support, and we want to make sure that stays, of a high quality and a high caliber. But one of the things that, kind of a ChatOps ideal that we're taking to heart is, when you do ChatOps right, you could make an administrator who may not be Mongo, a Mongo expert or a RabbitMQ expert. You make them more powerful. And so we're going to be shipping meta actions out of the box that can allow StackStorm to do management of itself. Like, if you give me knowledge about how to provision a server in your infrastructure, maybe that's AWS or some other cloud, or you've got your home homegrown provisioning tool, if you give me knowledge of that and I need to go rebalance myself, well, I'll at least recommend to you, here's a ChatOps command you can run, right? And then as we get more mature down that road, maybe we can get to the point where it's kind of managing itself, right? So we're leveraging one of the ideals that we have is, with good ChatOps, you can take the domain experts, give them the tools to make these really complex workflows, scripts, and management, and then hand them off to somebody who can then use them to operate. So.
Okay. Cool.
Can I ask a question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. We're using this new fancy-dancy Logitech Hangout system, so I don't know how well this works yet.
Nice.
As Brandon mentioned, you guys are using a lot of open source tools under the hood. Curious, from a philosophical standpoint, do you guys see yourself as a product on top of those tools that one would interface with at the kind of the interface level that you give them, or do you encourage them to embrace the tools and to customize them as they would if they were apart from StormStack? I don't know if that makes sense. Do you want people hacking on the tools and modifying them on, with their own features and then integrating, or do you want them using kind of StormStack as the product and then you decide how the tools work underneath them?
I think the answer is yes, right? Because you're going to run into both scenarios. We want to come out with this action pack, and we're really working real hard to get people writing action packs internally. We're making big pushes toward that, and then kind of spinning up our community to build those. There's going to be this kind of out-of-the-box concept of, what we're calling infrastructure design patterns. So our ultimate goal is if you have, or something here's a continuous delivery pipeline and you don't have one, here's a template for it. You may be able to drop it in today because you don't have anything in its greenfield, or maybe you've got something you need to kind of adapt those components. Because one of the other value adds that we have is, we don't want this to be you have to use our integrations. It is so simple to write an integration to existing tools or to modify these actions that then I can use to kind of tack on additional things. So it's build your own sandcastle, and we're going to provide tools out of the box for you too.
Cool. And then with ChatOps, is Qbot anything you're going to integrate with? GitHub's Qbot?
Yeah. We're actually kind of toying with that. We're going back and forth of whether we integrate with the bots themselves, the Qbot, the Lida, the Error. Those are the three we're kind of looking at to go that route, or whether we integrate with the chat rooms themselves, right? The Skypes, the Campfires, the Slacks, right? Because most of these tools we can kind of create an internal view and listener. So we don't have an answer. We're going to be iterating on that here actually very shortly after we finish our current sprint of what does that look like. And certainly if you have feedback, we'd love to hear it.
Cool.
So if you're trying to get the community to kind of start building these action packs and stuff, you're version 6 or 0.6, I should clarify, and you're working on 0.61. You did 0.51 November 3rd, 0.6 December 8th. So it seems like you're doing about monthly. Do you kind of see going past 9, or do you see it going 1.0? And I guess to also dovetail with that question, how much of the APIs and things that you're building out now do you anticipate are going to change so that, let's say I jumped in right now and I wanted to automate a bunch of my infrastructure and leverage everything that I can in StormStack, am I going to be bitten by the fact that, 4 months down the line, everything's changed prior to you guys going 1.0?
That is a good question. So we do talk about this internally at StackStorm, and one of the things that we're trying to do is get good at what the operations is, right? Like practicing being a production application today and what that means. But we also know that pre 1.0, there's a lot of things changing, right? We're trying to version our API, so we have a versioned API today, which may or may not change. And we're making changes to the underneath the hood pretty much every day as we find the little kind of fun edge cases that we need to suss out. That being said, again, it kind of goes back to our support end. Killing our early friends and the doctors in the process, right? Because we're trying to build that community. I don't want to get to the point where like, hey, come and play with 0.6, and then 0.7 is a completely different tool that you can't use, right? So it will be gradual. We're already playing and practicing as if we're in production, and we're working to get even better kind of production ready. good, full-fledged documentation. We've got good docs now. We're going to make them even better, and versioned APIs and all things of the sort.
And so you're totally going to definitely follow SemVer. So I won't really, so long as I stay in the zero point 0.6 sandbox, I'll be okay, right?
That's the idea right now. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. And our sprints are like kind of feature sprints are about a month a piece at this point. And then as we get bug fixes, we're pushing them out pretty much immediately if we can, right? I mean, we've got a continuous delivery pipeline for our tool already internally, powered by StackStorm. We're going to have a blog post on that here shortly. That we use to build StackStorm, and we want to be able to like quickly show that, look, using our tool, you can get quick iteration on things like this.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
So, kind of a little on William's question, but also like the substrate of StackStorm, right? The Mongo, the Rabbit, your Python services. How much are those to be treated as like sort of like appliance installations for StackStorm only versus like if I'm already running those in my infrastructure, I can like build on top of, I can deploy the other pieces around them, what is sort of that deployment piece, like for maybe more, people already have a more mature like infrastructure story. Is it more appliancey or is it more like, here it's open source pieces, build them and
Yeah, we're kind of playing with both approaches right now. So we have a Docker image that we're using to treat it as the kind of appliance view of the world that's kind of full wrapped and has all of these things in it. So if you want to just drop that in today, you can use that. But certainly, like we encourage our customers, if they've got these pieces of the stack already, here's the migration scripts to get them plugged in, right? If you've got a Mistral stack already, we plug into that. If you've got a MySQL or a Mongo stack already, we'll plug into that, right? We're not, again, right, this is like ultimate freedom here. We're not trying to like lock anybody in. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We want to be able to demonstrate just by virtue of how awesome we are that you want to use us.
Cool. So how much? Well, I guess since you guys aren't like doing a ton on the SaaS front end yet, so you don't have a lot of infrastructure there. But in terms of like your own infrastructure, like how like dog foodie are you doing with your own like CI and maybe like CD stuff and chat ops?
Yeah. I mean, it's day one stuff, right? Like we're really trying to go to the point of if we can't work this way, how can we get other people to work this way, right? So we've got a CI pipeline. We have a preliminary ChatOps kind of integration today. It's there, and we're working on making it even better. And all of the kind of dog fooding we do internally, and we want to make sure, again, it's infrastructure as code. So from nothing, I like to steal from the James White Manifesto. Everything should be able to be defined as code, and we've got everything down from provisioning all the way up to an application running defined as code in different pieces of the stack. One of the things that we're playing with right now is this idea of being able to even ship out a development environment that is fully featured, that you can like start up today in a Vagrant environment or whatnot, and start hacking on with your favorite configuration management tool of choice to start using those as the existing tools to build the Lego blocks, and then use StackStorm to make it even more powerful.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about after last week's thing was sort of like, where can you get started with ChatOps? And it seems to me a lot of where you can get started is just like introspection, kind of. Like being able to like query about the state of things.
Right.
And it seems like a lot of that, you could tap into a lot of that with this.
Yeah, and that's our goal. Like, there's this anecdote that I like to give. Again, I'm going to use an example from James White. He's got a lot of them, but he's the epitome of the lazy admin that we hope to kind of embody here. He worked at a company, and he had CSRs coming to him and saying, like, look, I need to know the status of X printer or Y printer at site unknown. And instead of continually manually answering these questions and tickets, he created a ChatOps command for them. And then within months, they didn't bother him at least for that thing anymore, right? And that power exists, and we want to be able to leverage that. Like, look, wouldn't it be neat today if you had a graphing infrastructure to be able to pull graphs into your chat room, right? Wouldn't it be neat if you had a logging infrastructure already to pull logs into your chat room? Wouldn't it be neat to just know, like, if a package is installed on a system, right? It's that kind of like small, quick hits, right? The atomic actions that we're trying to build anyway, that then you can use to build the really complex actions. So yeah, we absolutely envision it as like, passive discovery at first, and then as people get more comfortable with the system and gain the trust, building into like, oh, here may be a destructive action or whatnot. One of the things I like to say is, I had the privilege of working at GitHub and learning about this, and it was just such a huge thing. I can't work another way again, and I want to make sure that I can expose this to as many people as possible, so that again, you can't work any other way again, right? Like I want Hubot and Stackstorm and to be in the hearts and minds of everybody. So yeah.
Yeah, this seems really interesting. Like a lot of what you're doing reminds me a lot of how I'm becoming a big fan of Rundeck.
Yeah.
In that it's a framework of a lot of the stuff that you need. Like, someone might build like a little Sinatra app to abstract this, or a shell scrap to abstract that, and and then it's like, what do I do with the logging? And there's a lot of the framework around like orchestration stuff that is actually the hard part, and like
right.
You can get up with a bunch of bespoke, and so I think this gives you a lot of that. Like, I could envision all of your chat op stuff, like having Stackstorm be the abstraction for all of that. It does all that stuff on your behalf.
Yep.
But then below it, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like below it, right? It can be like you said, a local script, a Python object, a remote shell script, kind of like anything you want, it can talk out to.
Mm-hmm. That's the goal, right? And that's the value add too, is when you go into existing companies that have tried this and are building this internally, because this is there are companies that are doing this. These scripts are they are bespoke, right? And everybody kind of takes a different approach to how I take command line arguments in, and how I emit audit logs out, and if I even do access control, what does that look like? I don't ever want to have to maintain some of that stuff, right? It's just going to be a pain. And then when I make changes to my infrastructure, that's equally a pain. I've got to go through hundreds and hundreds of these scripts to figure out what changed and how do I adapt them. And soon I'm actually spending more time maintaining the system to maintain my system. So it becomes like a bad feedback loop. But with our system, it's exactly that, right? Like, let's give you all the tools so that all you really have to care about is the action itself, and then we'll take care of the rest.
Yeah, that definitely, I was going to say, embraces the DRY principle. Just you're not going to repeat yourself in building these common boilerplate, abstractions around all of your workflows. So that's really cool.
Absolutely.
So I think, Will, you had said on IRC, is that you that had a couple questions about Chef? Is that the same?
Yeah. I don't know if it's a good time now or And...
No, I think we can, we can talk about it.
Yeah, hopefully there'll be really brief, solutions from all of the expertise in the room. Basically, I'm kind of newer to Chef. I was doing more Ansible previously, and so I've been trying to wrap my head around all of the different methodologies that exist in the Chef world. And one of them in particular, the one repo per cookbook ideal versus one repo for all, is one that I've been really kind of wrestling with. And I'm really I'm drawn towards the one repo for all, one that really elevates the Git repo or whatever source control you use as the source of truth. And so everything is contained in a branch, it's holistic, kind of have one view of everything that's going to be involved in a node's deterministic state. But then there's a lot of people who are arguing that you lose a lot of things with that, right? And the one Git repo for each cookbook is actually better, gives you more modularity and ability to customize things. And it does seem like ops code is leaning towards that more too. And again, I know they're trying to be agnostic, but that's the sense I get. So I was just curious if anyone has any thoughts on why the one repo per cookbook is better, because I'm really struggling to see like a solid example of that. I just hear people say it's easier to make changes or to do things without breaking other things, right? There's like a smaller attack surface when you're making a change, but I guess I just don't see any examples of that, or I can't understand that. So I was curious if you guys have any experience with that.
So James, I know you have more of a Puppet background, but I think the like mono repo versus repo per module, it's a lot of the same discussion, different tooling.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on it from a more abstract point of view?
Yeah. I know I can give you an example, and it's not, I haven't observed this firsthand, I've only heard about it through colleagues of mine, but it's Google does this, right? They have a big giant monolith repo for everything. And if you make a change to one of these applications in this giant repository, you change an interface, it's your responsibility to parse through this entire repo to figure out where those interfaces are and change them to adapt to your new code, right? So like looking at it from that view of the world, it becomes one system, right? This is my system, this is all of the code and the authoritative source for all of these things. I kind of take a hybrid approach, honestly, right? Like there are going to be some areas of the world where I need that view of the world, where I need that one view of the world. This is my system, kind of like my site modules or site cookbooks for Chef, right? Like maybe I would have all those in one repository. But the community modules that I absorb from other people, like that I'm going to share as discrete units, those can be individual. I know that I've used that strategy actually relatively successfully with both Chef and Puppet, because you can specify multiple places to absorb cookbooks or module paths, and so you can kind of take and try both and see which works for you. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, definitely like the external cookbooks being separate, that does resonate with me. Like that, I can see definite logic for that. But it's like when you have all of your own cookbooks, and let's say you have 20, 30 cookbooks, 20, 30 Git repos internally, it seems like much more overhead than the cost benefit doesn't seem to be there for all the overhead.
Yeah.
So, we're at my work at Lookout. We're sort of in the middle of transitioning from a mono repo to a cookbook per repo, sort of the Burke Shelf way, as it's called, right, with Chef. And it's a transition that we're making, and it's certainly there are challenges to it. I think the argument for it, and kind of why we're trying to do it, is the idea of like treating each cookbook as a piece of software that you're developing, right? So that's why it has a repo, because it has its own versions, it has its own tests, right? And then some of the things that are easy about a mono repo in terms of the changes, like you can make a bunch of changes to a set of things. That's where the whole wrapper cookbook, service cookbook idea comes in, and you have these, like, you have library cookbooks, application cookbooks, service cookbooks, and you're gluing them together in these wrappers, these environments, or some of the terms vary depending on who you talk to, but you sort of compose these higher order abstractions. But that in of itself is also sort of treated as a piece of software. So you're doing Semver, and I think that's where like a lot of that stuff, the ideals behind why you want to do this is it assumes that sort of each unit is you're gonna do Semver on it, you're gonna be doing testing, you're gonna run it through a CI pipeline, you're gonna be doing like QA stage production, sort of like rollouts of these units of work, with sort of CI and CD as part of it. So I think that's where those principles are where the advocacy for that model comes from. But it does bring with it a lot of challenges in terms of tooling and workflow, but in theory, right, if you're running like if you're running a distributed systems, you're sort of doing microservice SOA type things, you're applying those same principles to the rest of the code that your organization is putting out, and so that's where it comes in. It's like you're applying the same principles to your infrastructure as code as you are to your sort of services as code stuff.
So it's like a standardized philosophy across the organization.
Yeah.
And I wonder too, though, like, could you not accomplish the same things with CI testing and continuous delivery with the monolithic repo, though? Like, what?
No, I think it's possible. There was a discussion in Chef Hacking yesterday in the morning about some of that, and folks who were doing a mono repo, but they'd also chosen to not use any external cookbooks. They said we're not going to do any community. We're going to own everything ourselves, and we're going to do a mono repo. So they're doing CI, but they've chosen to take on the engineering overhead, right, of not depending on external cookbooks. So they sort of control the changes, and then it makes it easier to control the tests and the CI, because they don't have to constantly, you know what I mean? They don't have to absorb upstream changes on an uncontrolled frequency, which I think is
Right.
part of the challenge, right? Is the more you depend on upstream, the more you have to sort of tap into those, watch the GitHub repos and watch the issues and do that testing as, goes from 0.6 to 0.7. Like, we use an upstream Kafka cookbook, and 0.7 just came out, and there's some non-backwards compatible changes. So like, we're pinned on 0.6 until I have time to do testing on that. So I think it is possible. I think the more you try to use upstream, the more challenging it gets, because there's a whole maintenance overhead of trying to integrate upstream into your mono repo.
But in some ways too, and I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate. I'm not really sure how I feel about these things yet. But isn't there, like, your integration eventually is going to be everything monolithic on the server, right? So don't you have to know that at some point anyways, how it's going to behave as a whole?
Yeah, you do.
But you can also kind of silo that off. I mean, I don't manage chef cookbooks, so let me be blank here, but I'm a programmer, and I have the common dilemma of where do I put my code? Where do I put the libraries that I'm building? Where do I put this? And I think it's just a common theme regardless of ops or dev. And I think what it comes down to is really look at what is your core. Like, as you change something, was this just a patch? Was this some sort of API improvement? Or did you drastically change it? And what else does it really affect? Because maybe those things don't really make sense inside the mono. So if you have like a core of all your cookbooks that you really need to know that are solid, but you also have a bunch of other cookbooks that you're working on and moving those things forward separately that have no impact on your core, maybe it's the hybrid like James was suggesting, because that makes a little bit more sense, because then you're really starting to pull it apart. Because, yeah, when you get to the end, you're going to have the monolith, but if you're building from the monolith, you move slower. Whereas if you're building with the Lego blocks, all these small little pieces, they test very quickly, they get up and running, and they're good to go. And then you just have to do one big test every now and again to make sure everything still works together.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess I've just been afraid of, like, seeing like the Berkshire way ideals and those talks, like, of doing anything other than that, like feeling like I'm going to hit some major limitation. But definitely, like, what you guys are talking about, the hybrid approach seems a little more sensible to me, and that's kind of liberating to think I can do that as well and not have to feel like I have to make every single cookbook its own repo. Yeah. Another thing too. Oh, go ahead.
We have the same issue with the programming world, where you have these law of Demeter. It's just like, it's a suggestion. It's a good practice to stay within, because it kind of keeps code clean. But when I know that the way I'm going to write this is breaking that law for a very specific reason, that's okay. It's just a guideline, right? And then you're kind of taking the horse by the reins. Instead of just like riding along in the sleigh, you're like, hey, I want this sleigh to go this way, because I know what I'm doing now. And I'm making very educated decisions about what I want to do.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, that last part you said about knowing what you're doing. I don't feel as strongly about that, I guess.
And it's good to test it out. I mean, especially with our test infrastructures and everything we have, and version control. I love Git, because it's just like I can play with something in a branch and see if it works. And if it doesn't, I just scrap it and I move on.
Yeah, trash it.
Yeah, and that's actually another part that I was wrestling with, which was cross repo change sets. A lot of times, I'm working on many cookbooks at once to produce some sort of feature in the environment, and with all these repos, it got really hard to express everything in a branch. Well, it was impossible, right? I had many branches and many pull requests, and it was hard to kind of experiment, because you'd be like, you'd have to clean up all these branches you've created, and also, like, to show it to someone else, they can't see it holistically, because it's all over the place. So,
At that point in time, maybe pull all the code together for a little bit, and just because I built a library internally for our product, and whenever it was the first integration with it, and I was messing around with it, I'm like, oh, I totally messed this up. So I unpacked it because I'm a Ruby guy. So I unpacked the gem. I fixed the gem inside my product, made sure it worked the way I wanted it to, and then I backported the changes to the other one. But yeah, as that gets harder, if anything, you could almost say the tooling doesn't exist for us to deal with having all these changes across multiple things and kind of moving them forward.
Well, thanks so much, guys. We got to jump off because we're getting kicked out of the room, but really appreciate it, and you guys are awesome. So
No problem. And maybe we should revisit this in January as a separate hangout.
absolutely, we'd love to attend if you guys do that. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Cool.
All right.
Yeah, well, I got a boogie too, so thank you, James, for your time. I think this is really cool. So if folks want to get started with StackStorm, what should they do?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. Head to the website, www.stackstorm.com/community. We've got RPMs, Debian packages, and Docker images. Give them a shot, load them up, give us some feedback. Know it's early days, and know that we want to fix it and do it right. So definitely welcome and desperately love feedback.
Okay, awesome. Well, good luck, and it's definitely something that's going on my list of things to at least fiddle with at home. So
Excellent.
I'll definitely let you know if I do, time being what it is. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks. So next week we're actually going to have two Hangops. Originally we just planned one for Thursday. We're going to be talking with some of the folks from Mozilla on the Crash Stats team. It's a team that I worked with quite a bit when I was still Mozilla and WebOps. They manage the infrastructure that deals with all the Firefox crash reports, which is something like 3 million plus crash reports a day. So it's a pretty massive distributed systems. And they're currently in the process of making a bunch of tech changes and moving into AWS, moving off of like in-house Hadoop and a bunch of crazy stuff. So we're going to have Chris Lawnon and a couple other people from that team join us on Thursday at 10 a.m. And I'll tweet all this out. But also then on Friday, this is kind of more ad hoc, but Jess Frizzell from Docker is actually going to join us. So she's a Linux on the desktop user and actually does like pretty much runs everything in containers. They call her like her mutt, her like all the like local stuff. So we're gonna talk about like containerizing your local desktop and what that world looks like. So she's on the Docker core team and actually just did the 1.40 release management. And so she put a blog post the other day about like running Linux on your Mac and stuff, and she's just like really deep into a bunch of interesting like Linux stuff, and so I thought it'd be kind of a fun topic to explore with her. So we're going to talk about that Friday at 11. So we have two up next week that both should be pretty good. So all right, with that we'll kick it off. Everyone have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.